The worst moment wasn't the first glitch, or even the first time I heard my name echo from the speakers. No, the moment that still crawls up my spine happened later, when the screen stopped being a screen and became something alive. The game froze on a single sprite, a shape that should have been familiar but wasn't. It used to be my favorite character when I was a kid. I remembered its cheerful little cry, the hours I'd spent leveling it up, the comfort it gave me back when life was simpler. But now it was wrong. Its body was stretched thin, skin gray, and twitching between frames that didn't belong in any cartridge I'd ever seen. Its eyes were too wide, too human, and they blinked out of sync, like it was trying to learn what blinking meant. And then it leaned forward. Not the sprite, the thing. The pixels reached past the edge of the display, the static bending as its face pressed outward, flattening against the glass like a trapped insect. My controller fell from my hands as the speakers cracked with a voice, low, corrupted, layered with static and something wet underneath. It didn't say my trainer's name. It said my name. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. If I'd stopped when I saw the first warning sign, I whisper to myself even now, I wouldn't still be afraid to turn on my console. You think you know nostalgia. You don't. We like to think our childhood games are safe, that they'll always be there waiting for us, unchanged, comforting. But once you've seen what I saw, once you've heard something claw its way through the bright, 8-bit veneer into your living room, you never look at nostalgia the same way again. Because that was the moment I realized it wasn't just a game. I should have unplugged everything. I should have smashed the cartridge. Instead, I sat there, shaking, staring at its too-wide grin as the text box appeared at the bottom of the screen. You let me out. The words burned into me. I blinked, and for half a second, I swore the reflection in the darkened glass of the screen wasn't mine. But I should start from the beginning. And that's when I realized the monster wasn't trapped in the game anymore. It's strange how something as simple as a piece of plastic can hold so much weight. A cartridge, just a chunk of plastic and wires, no bigger than your palm. But when I found this one, it didn't feel harmless. It felt like something that had been waiting. I should back up. Most nights, my life is painfully normal. Work, dinner, scrolling through Reddit until my eyes burn, then collapsing into bed and doing it all over again. The only thing that breaks the monotony is my habit of chasing old comforts, digging out the games I used to play as a kid, replaying them until that little spark of nostalgia makes me feel less empty. That's how it started. I'd been on a nostalgia kick for weeks, swapping between old handhelds, digging through dusty boxes in my closet, even browsing forums to track down ROMs. One night, while scrolling a thread about lost or banned versions of childhood classics, I saw it. The post was short, almost lazy, like the writer didn't want to be noticed. Cartridge discovered, not supposed to exist, play with caution, do not load after midnight. That was it. No screenshots, no long creepypasta-style rant, just a single blurry photo of the cartridge, my childhood game, but the label looked off. The colors darker, the font stretched thin like someone had photocopied it 100 times. And the comments, they were worse. Some users claimed the cartridge was never meant to see daylight, that it wasn't a hack, but something made internally and buried. Pulled from shelves after one test run, one person wrote. Another swore their friend played it at a sleepover and wasn't the same after. Then came the rumor that hooked me, the one that buzzed in my brain long after I closed the tab. If you played past midnight, the game played you. Sounds ridiculous, right? Exactly the kind of thing people on those boards make up to freak out newbies. But the picture stuck in my head. The way the cartridge looked wrong, like an imitation of the real thing. I told myself it was just curiosity. That's what I always say. But if you followed my other stories, you know I never learn. 2 days later, I was digging through old boxes in my attic, half convinced I'd find something similar. And there it was. Not in a box of games, not tucked neatly away with my other cartridges. It was wedged between old VHS tapes, dust thick across the label. Same stretched font, same wrong colors. I don't even remember owning it. Holding it, I felt this chill run up my arm like the attic air had dropped 10 degrees. But nostalgia's a funny poison. My brain shoved the unease aside and whispered, "Hey, wouldn't it be fun to play this again? Just like old times." That night, I set it up in my room. My setup was nothing special. Old console hooked into a second-hand TV, the soft glow of the screen filling the dark. The kind of cozy scene that makes you think of popcorn, sodas, and sleepovers. Except I wasn't a kid anymore. The house was silent, the only sound the occasional creak of wood as the place settled. I glanced at the clock, 2:57 a.m. I could have waited until morning. Should have. But something about the time made it feel right, like if there was any truth to those rumors, I'd be able to prove it. And if not, then I'd get a quick laugh, maybe even a good story to tell online. I told myself I was in control, that I was choosing to do this. But deep down, I think the choice had already been made the second I picked up that cartridge. The title screen loaded with a familiar jingle, the same one I remembered humming along to as a kid. And yet, beneath the sweetness of that tune, I thought I heard something else. A second note hidden, off-key. Wrong. I leaned closer to the TV, controller in hand, waiting for the game to really begin. Everyone online said this version was never supposed to exist. And I was about to find out why. Booting it up felt like stepping back into childhood. The intro screen flashed just like I remembered, logo, music, the little animation. Except the colors seemed duller. Like someone had drained the saturation just enough to make it uncanny, but not enough for me to turn the console off. The jingle played almost right, but certain notes dragged, lingering a fraction too long. It was the kind of thing you could brush off as faulty hardware, except it was. I knew that sound. It was sharp, deliberate, like something in the code wanted me to notice. I hit start anyway. The opening sequence began. Professor Oak, or at least the version of him the game wanted me to see, shuffled onto the screen. His sprite looked tired. That's the only way I can describe it. His smile was too thin, his eyes too small. He greeted me with the same line I'd seen 100 times, but it flickered once before the text fully formed. Welcome back. Not welcome to the world of Pokémon, just back. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was a glitch. Old cartridges did this all the time, right? Except this was the first thing it showed me. Then came the name screen. Normally, you pick your name, type it in, maybe chuckle at nomming your rival something stupid. But this time, the cursor wasn't blinking in the empty box. A name was already typed there. My real name. Letter for letter. I swear my fingers went cold just holding the controller. For a second, I thought maybe I'd played this before, maybe as a kid I'd typed it in and forgotten. But no, kids don't forget things like that. And besides, the cartridge hadn't been in my game drawer. It had been buried in the attic, somewhere I didn't even remember storing it. I hovered over the confirm option, thinking about erasing it. But the second I moved the cursor, the screen glitched, letters flashing red, the sound buzzing harshly, until I put it back on confirm. So I did. The game thanked me, actually spelled it out in text. Thank you for remembering. Then it moved on like nothing happened. I almost shut it off right there. I should have. But nostalgia's a trap. Once the opening wrapped, I found myself in my room in Pallet Town. The layout looked familiar, but the walls were darker, the colors muddier, as if the game's world had been left to rot. My character's sprite faced the bed, unmoving. When I tried to walk away, it froze for a second and displayed a message. Too tired to leave. That line doesn't exist in the game. I know it doesn't. Eventually, the sprite obeyed and I stepped outside. The rival showed up right on cue. Normally, he's cocky, smirking, tossing out little insults. But this time, his text box stuttered. Why are you here? Then his sprite flickered, like it was struggling to load properly, before snapping back to normal and delivering his usual taunt. By the time I reached Oak's lab, the unease had already sunk in. The starters were waiting on the table, but the sprites were wrong. Squirtle looked slightly deflated, like its shell was cracked. Charmander's flame was dim, flickering weakly. Bulbasaur's bulb wasn't green, it was gray. I hovered over each one, half expecting them to disappear. Instead, the game offered me something else. A fourth option. The sprite didn't make sense. It was static noise, a scrambled mess of pixels twitching in and out of shape. The name box read nothing but question marks. I didn't want to pick it. I didn't even want to highlight it. But the cursor pulled itself down automatically, locking on the fourth slot until I pressed A. The screen went black for a second, then filled with white text. It cries for you. That's when the cry played. Pokémon cries are usually short, chirpy sound clips. This wasn't. It was long, warped, like feedback from a broken microphone. It rose in pitch, then dropped low enough to vibrate the TV's speakers. It didn't stop when the text box disappeared. It lingered, echoing faintly even as I left the lab. I told myself it was just a corrupted file. That's what I wanted to believe. But when I opened the menu, there it was in my party. No name, just a blank slot. Its sprite was nothing but static. And yet, I could swear, if I stared long enough, I saw something inside the static. Shapes trying to push through. I kept playing because of course I did. That's how this always goes, right? The first step seemed almost normal, catching wild Pokémon, battling trainers, moving from route to route. But every so often, the game glitched. Grass patches flickered black. NPC dialogue stuttered into nonsense for a frame before correcting itself. One kid trainer ran up to me, smiling as usual, then his text box read, "Don't look behind you." I froze in my chair, skin prickling, before the dialogue switched to his regular battle challenge. And the worst part? Every time I tried to use the nameless Pokémon in battle, the game lagged. When I finally selected it, the screen went pitch black for a full 3 seconds. Then the battle returned, the enemy sprite completely gone. The text box said, "Enemy fainted." No attack animation, no health bar, just gone. I don't know why I kept going. Maybe it was the lure of nostalgia, maybe just morbid curiosity. But something inside me whispered that I hadn't even scratched the surface. Because if what I'd seen so far was unsettling, what waited in the darker corners of this game was something else entirely. And you'll want to hear what happened when I reached the place the forums warned me about. The zone nobody was supposed to enter. A place even the game itself seemed afraid to load. Lavender Town. At first, I thought the glitches were just atmosphere. Creepy, sure, but still technically playable. But after a few hours, the game stopped pretending to follow its own rules. The first real break happened in Viridian Forest. Normally, it's crawling with bug catchers, but this time, the paths twisted unnaturally. When I turned north, the screen scrolled endlessly, trees repeating like a broken loop. When I finally stopped and opened the menu, I noticed something new. Behind my sprite, faintly drawn, was another figure. At first, I thought it was just shadowing. But when I moved, it moved too, lagging slightly, like a second player following behind me. Its sprite was gray, faceless, and the more I walked, the more distinct it became. By the time I reached the end of the forest, the figure had grown clearer. It looked like one of the Pokémon trainers, except its body was half buried in static, legs fused into the ground as though it was dragging itself. And then it spoke. Text box. "You can't leave me here." I dropped the controller. My pulse thundered in my ears. That dialogue wasn't coded into the game. It couldn't be. But when I picked the controller back up, the text box had cleared, replaced by the usual bug catcher's challenge. That should have been the point where I turned it off, but I didn't. Because the next area I entered was Lavender Town. The music was off. You know the legend about that town's theme, the one that supposedly drove kids insane? What I heard wasn't the original. It was slower, guttural, more like distorted breathing than music. Every few seconds, there was a sharp, irregular note, like a scream cut short. The Pokémon Tower loomed above the town, but something was wrong with the villagers. Every NPC I tried talking to spat out broken phrases. "He's hungry. He's watching. He wants you." Their sprites flickered, as if parts of their bodies were missing for frames at a time. I forced myself into the tower. The usual ghosts appeared, blocking paths, but when I tried to battle them, the game didn't load proper encounters. Instead, my party screen flashed open on its own. All of my Pokémon had fainted, even the nameless static creature. But there was a new entry, forced into my party. It was just called Dead. Its sprite was a jumble of limbs, like a Pokémon graveyard mashed together into one abomination. When I clicked on it, the Pokédex opened automatically. The entry read, "It remembers everything you've done." Then the console buzzed, not the speakers, the console itself. I leaned close and I swear I heard whispering. My name, over and over, too quiet to mistake for audio. That's when I realized the game wasn't just breaking its rules, it was breaking mine. I kept pushing forward because some part of me wanted answers, but the tower wouldn't let me climb. Every staircase looped back to the ground floor, where the faceless figure now stood waiting. Only it wasn't faceless anymore. Its pixelated eyes had formed, and they were red. The text box appeared without me pressing anything. "Stop playing." Then another line, before I could move. "Or I'll play for you." I sat frozen in my chair. Laugh if you want, but in that moment it didn't feel like I was holding the controller anymore. My thumbs pressed buttons, but the character moved where it wanted. Up the stairs, past the flickering ghosts, deeper into the tower. At the very top, the screen went black. For almost a minute, nothing happened. Then a cutscene I'd never seen before loaded. The sprite of my character lay in a bed, motionless. The static Pokémon hovered beside him like a shadow, and Professor Oak walked in. Except his face wasn't his face. His mouth stretched down past his chin, wide enough to swallow the whole sprite. When the text box appeared, it wasn't his cheerful greeting. "Why did you come back?" I tapped the buttons, desperate to skip the cutscene. Nothing worked. The text crawled slowly across the screen, unskippable. "You should have left it buried." Another line. "But now he knows you." I tried resetting the console. No response. The reset button clicked, but the screen stayed frozen. When the cutscene finally ended, my character was standing outside the tower again, but something had changed. Every NPC in town had turned into copies of me. Not my in-game sprite me. My real face, rendered crudely in pixels, mouth gaping open, eyes hollow black. When I spoke to them, they all said the same thing. "He's waiting." I don't know why, but I kept playing. Maybe I needed to know who he was. Maybe I just wanted proof this wasn't all in my head. The routes ahead warped worse than before. Wild encounters showed Pokémon with wrong colors, wrong cries. A Rattata's head twisted backward. A Pidgey's wings dragged across the dirt like broken arms. Every time I caught one, the Pokédex added new entries, darker than the last. "This Pokémon died yesterday." "It watches from the corner of your room." "Do not look outside your window." I slammed the console lid shut, heart hammering. For a second, I thought I'd ended it. But when I opened it again, the game hadn't paused. The world kept moving. The faceless trainer stood in front of my character, waiting patiently. "He's hungry." That was all it said. My party screen opened without my input. All 6 slots filled instantly with the same static Pokémon. Then the whispering started again, louder this time, clearer. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I forced the lid closed again, yanked the cartridge out, and tossed it across the room. My console went dark. But the whispering didn't stop. And I keep thinking about something the game told me, something I can't unhear. "Stop playing, or I'll play for you." So I have to ask, if anyone else has played this, please, tell me I'm not the only one. Tell me this is just a corrupted file, a shared nightmare, anything. Because the question keeps eating away at me. If the game doesn't play by its own rules, if it knows me, then what happens if you lose? Breaking the fourth wall/reality bleeds in. I thought the game was a thing that lived in cartridges and bytes, a closed loop of sprites and sound files. That illusion shattered the second the title screen knew my name. At first it was small, subtle reshuffles of text, a blink where blinking wasn't programmed. Then the name appeared across the splash in blocky letters, not the name I'd typed as a kid, but my real name, full and exact, the one I'd used for bills and accounts, and a username I hardly ever used anymore. The letters pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and the jingle that should have followed stuttered into a single warped note that sat in the room like a dropped pin. I told myself it was a hacked ROM. Someone had injected a file. Someone who knew too much about me. That sounded safer, less supernatural. Whatever it was, it had my name. When the game booted into the overworld, the boxes began to type with their own tempo. Sentences crawled out without my pressing a button. "Why won't you listen?" one read, and I laughed, an ugly, defensive sound. You get used to talking to yourself when you narrate things online. The laugh dissolved fast when the next line appeared. "Because you can't hide." The font resembled the in-game dialogue, but the syntax was wrong. It used phrases I'd never seen in the official script. It addressed memories I had not typed into any database. It referenced a childhood I'd never recorded in text. Things only I would know. My right hand went numb on the controller. I remember thinking about how ridiculous it would be to call a friend and say, "My game knows my mortgage lender." And then how, for a horrible second, I wondered if that would even be a joke anymore. The console began to make noises that weren't sound files. A soft mechanical clicking, then a high hiss underneath that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I paused the game, except there was no pause. The screen kept moving. The text boxes kept updating. Buttons did nothing. The room felt simultaneously louder and hollow. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't know my phone number was connected to anything in that file. I certainly didn't know a ROM could send anything to a cellular network. The lock screen lit up, and there was a message. No contact, no number, just text, black on gray. "Stop playing," it read. I stared at it until the words blurred. There are ways to fake texts. I tried to rationalize. Apps spoofed numbers. My mind ran recipes for safety checks I could perform. All of them seemed plausible. All of them felt like paper-thin explanations when my monitor reflected my face and the face behind it didn't match my expression. The in-game camera, if you could call it that, seemed to pan toward the window in my sprite's house. The sprite turned its head, and the screen filled with a grainy, blocky image of a room. At first it looked like any other in-game interior. Then the door frame in the pixel room matched the exact shape of the door in my apartment. The crooked dent on the door frame, the exact placement of the posters, the crooked nail I forgot to hammer back in, every tiny flaw there mirrored my reality. I stood up slowly. Palms damp. The air smelled like old plastic and something metallic. I stepped to the window and pulled the blind a fraction. Outside, nothing moved, just the glow of streetlights and the occasional car. I told myself the game had mapped a generic room that happened to match my own. Coincidence stacked on coincidence, but my muscles wouldn't trust coincidence anymore. Sprites began to glitch into faces. Not the crude, joyful caricatures of childhood, but faces with too many frames, mouths bending and freezing in expressions I knew from real life, an ironic smile I use when I'm nervous, the way my sister used to scrunch her nose when she lied. The game had names for them. Not character names, real names. Names I'd cursed in high school. Names I hadn't typed into any save file. Names that made the back of my neck prickle. "Who are you?" I typed on my phone to a friend, fingers trembling. The response I received was immediate but not from a person. A new dialogue box had appeared on the TV. "I'm what you left behind." I spun around, every hair on my body awake, like a flock of tiny alarms. The room behind me was empty, except for the quiet whisper that had begun to thread itself through the speaker noise and the radiators and the thin walls. It said things in a cadence that didn't belong to any human speech I knew. It ticked like a clock and slid like soot. I took a video of the screen with my phone, hands shaking so badly it was a miracle the footage wasn't a smear. When I played it back, the file stuttered and then showed a single frame repeated. My living room, from the angle of the TV, but with someone standing behind the chair. Pixelated, far away, not fully formed, like it was still loading. I hit the power. The monitor died and my phone suddenly vibrated again. Another message appeared, a single word. Look. I won't even describe what the sprites showed me. Some of you wouldn't handle it. They flashed scenes I've never lived and memories I refuse to name, impressions that settled like ash in my mouth. I swear the game was watching me. It learned my pauses, my tells, the cadence of my laughter. It used them. I told myself to delete everything. I told myself it was over. I looked. And that's when the voice spoke, not from the TV, but from right behind me. If you've ever wondered why the game was banned, this is the reason. The night it happened, I thought I was prepared. I'd seen the glitches, the whispers, the text messages. I'd heard the voice behind me. I should have thrown the cartridge in the trash, smashed the console, walked away. But by then, it wasn't just a game anymore. It was unfinished business. When I powered it on again, the title screen didn't even bother with nostalgia. No cheery jingle. No pixelated mascots bouncing in place. Just a void black screen with one line of text. You're late. And below it, only one option. Continue. I clicked. My character wasn't in Pallet Town anymore. He was standing in a warped coliseum, a ring of jagged pixels hemming him in. The ground was ash gray, the sky pulsed like a heartbeat. In front of me stood the entity. It was Oak. It wasn't my rival. It wasn't even the static Pokemon. It was something else, something bigger. A trainer, maybe, but stretched too tall, limbs too long, eyes like hollow sockets that bled into the background. Every few frames, its body snapped into the form of someone I knew, my mother, my rival, me, before collapsing back into static. The music, if you could call it that, was nothing but a low growl undercut with the crunch of broken speakers. The battle menu appeared. Fight. Run. But no Pokemon, just me. I hovered over run, praying it would let me escape. The screen shook violently. You can't run from yourself. The entity stepped forward. Its text box didn't even stutter this time. Obey or defy. That was it, my choices. I laughed, bitter and scared, because both sounded like traps. Still, I picked obey. Maybe compliance would end it. The game went black. Then a new image appeared, my own bedroom, rendered in pixel form. My character lay in bed, unmoving. The entity stood beside him. Sleep, forever. The screen dimmed until the only thing visible was its face, leaning closer, closer, until the pixels nearly spilled out of the frame. I yanked the controller, my heart hammering, and slammed the console shut. For a second, I thought I'd escaped. Then the console powered itself back on. This time, I picked defy. The battle screen flickered red. My sprite pulled out a piquet ball, even though my party was empty. When it opened, something monstrous crawled out, a twisted fusion of all 6 Pokemon I'd ever caught in the playthrough. Its cries overlapped, a chorus of screams that drilled into my skull. The entity smiled. You made this. The monstrosity attacked without command. The screen filled with jagged text, corrupted code bleeding into every corner. My console shook in my hands, the plastic groaning as though it would crack. Then the text boxes slowed. Do you want to see? I didn't press anything. What you really are. The battle froze, the sprites dissolved. In their place was a mirror. Not a perfect one, but a jagged reflection of my face, rendered in clumsy 8-bit detail. Except my reflection smiled when I didn't. Except my reflection spoke. You kept me locked away. Its voice didn't come from the speakers. It came from the room, vibrating through the air, soft at first, then rising until I felt it in my teeth. I tried to turn off the console again, but my hands wouldn't listen. My thumbs pressed buttons I didn't choose. My character moved closer to the entity. This is not a game. The mirror shattered. Behind it, the entity's true form emerged, a towering silhouette with glitching limbs and a maw that stretched down past its chest. Every time the pixels broke apart, I swore I saw pieces of my own body inside it. The screen asked me one last question. Will you trade places? No, yes. The cursor pulsed, refusing to move away from yes. I fought it, but my controller felt magnetized. Sweat slicked my palms, every muscle in my body screaming to pull away. I didn't choose. The game chose for me. The screen went completely dark. Then my console buzzed, not the speakers, not the fan. The plastic itself vibrated like something was inside it. My TV flickered, static spilling across the glass. And then, clear as a church bell in a graveyard, the voice spoke again. Not text, not digital distortion. A voice. It said my name, out loud. I didn't sleep that night. When the console finally powered down, on its own this time, I ripped it from the wall, cords tearing loose like veins. I hurled the cartridge across the room and listened to it clatter against the floorboards. My chest was a drum, every beat louder than the last. But silence didn't bring peace. It brought dread. The house felt wrong. The air tasted metallic, like blood on a bitten tongue. Every creak in the walls made me think the game was listening. Every shift in the shadows made me believe the entity hadn't left. It had just gone quiet. I told myself it was only a dream. Stress, sleep deprivation. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the controller and imagined the whole thing. But the marks on my palms, those deep indents where I'd gripped the controller, said otherwise. The next morning, I did the only thing that made sense. I destroyed it. First, I tried deleting the ROM files. But when I booted up my computer, they weren't in any folder I remembered. They weren't even listed under recent. Instead, there was a single shortcut on my desktop. Play. No icon, just the word. I unplugged the tower, yanked out the hard drive, threw it into the trash with shaking hands. Then I turned to the cartridge. I doused it in lighter fluid out back, set it on the concrete, and struck a match. For a moment, I felt relief watching it blacken, the plastic curling and hissing. But then the fire sputtered, choking as though starved of oxygen. The cartridge cracked, and for a split second, I swear I heard something escape, like a sigh of relief or a laugh. The flames died. The cartridge sat in the ashes, untouched. So I buried it. I dug a hole in the woods, deeper than I thought my arms could reach, threw the cursed thing in, covered it with dirt, stamped the ground until my boots sank. For the first time in days, I let myself breathe. But that night, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard it. That cry, that awful cry from the game, the one no Pokémon should ever make. Distant, muffled, like it was calling from underground. I spat blood into the sink, realizing I'd bitten my cheek raw. The game wasn't gone. I unplugged the console, hid it in the closet. I don't even know why I kept it. Maybe some part of me hoped I was wrong, that if I never touched it again, the nightmare would stop. But the dreams didn't. I dreamt of pixels crawling under my skin, of text boxes filling my vision, of the entity waiting in the dark, whispering the same word over and over.
Trade. I started hearing things when I was awake, too. Little glitches in reality. A flicker in the corner of my eye. The faint crackle of static when I turned on the TV. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the soft click of buttons being pressed, even though my console was still locked away. And the worst part, I know I'm not the only one. I found whispers online, old threads, half-deleted posts, screenshots buried in forums nobody moderates anymore. Different usernames. Same story. A cartridge that shouldn't exist. A game that plays you back. A voice that knows your name. No one ever posts an ending. Just silence. Accounts abandoned. That's why I'm telling you this. I'm sharing it so maybe one of you can explain, or at least warn me what comes next. Because I know it isn't over. I can feel it. It's not just a game, it's a pattern, a cycle. And somehow, I've been pulled into it. Maybe some of you will say it's a hoax, a creepypasta, Just another haunted cartridge story. Believe what you want, but check your attics, check your closets, check the thrift store shelves where the dust gathers thickest. If you find a cartridge with no label, if you hear that off-key jingle playing in your head, don't touch it. Don't even look at it. Because once you do, it looks back. The worst part, when I woke up this morning, the cartridge was back on my desk.